Why do I have to be here? Because I need to pay rent. Because I want to give my cat a better life.
When I think about freedom, my mortgage doesn't bother me. I just accept it. I can't wait to be an adult and do all these things.
I just really enjoy putting eyeliner, doing my hair a certain way. I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, as long as my mom approves. I am Ana, and together with my co-host Andrea, for our first episode of the series, we wanted to discuss a simple yet intriguing concept: freedom.
Welcome to Sonder Characters.
When we did some research on this, we looked at a number of questions. And Andre, what do you think freedom means?
It depends who you're asking. Of course, we ask the number one source of information, Google. Google says that freedom is defined by Merriam-Webster as the quality or state of being free, such as the absence of necessity, coercion, or constraint in choice or action. Maybe liberation from slavery or from power of another.
I think there are a lot of different concepts from different cultures, which essentially shape our understanding of freedom. I mean, even looking at the definition, for instance, for a moment, all I could think about is the modern slavery, which is all around us, but often just out of sight. What does freedom mean to you personally? If you had to answer this question.
I have to answer this question, but I'm going to make you answer it too. Freedom for me means having the time to be creative. I spent my whole lifetime defining myself as a creative person, and I think that trickles down through different things in my life. So when I don't have the time to create and have a creative outlet, it feels that I'm working against myself. I don't care about anything else as much as I care about having or building that creativity in my life. Hence this podcast. I also like to draw. I also like to do some creative writing. When I don't build the time to do all these things, I feel that I'm not free. I feel that I'm a slave to some kind of weird system where I need to go to work and wash the dishes and do everything else. What about you?
Very different. For me, it's more about financial freedom. For me, freedom means paying off my mortgage, because that will allow me to perhaps also be creative to a certain extent and follow my passions, not think, oh, I have to do this because I have to pay my mortgage, which is such a big expense in our life. You need to live somewhere, have a roof over your head. We also have different types of freedom. Another interesting one is freedom of choice and will. When I read this, all I could think about is the idea of having kids. For a woman to choose if she decides to have kids or not. And even as a man, if they want to adopt, is not what society is telling you to do. You're a woman, you should, make babies. Another one is having a 9-to-5 job. So when I was thinking about paying off my mortgage, for me personally, cutting that off from my monthly expenses will mean that I don't have to work 9 to 5 just to pay my living expenses. Anything you'd like to add for freedom of choice and will?
When I think about freedom, my mortgage doesn't bother me. I just accept it as an expense, as an exchange, if you will, an exchange for living in a house that I like, right?
Or having a roof over your head.
Or having a roof over my head, exactly. But when I think about the 9 to 5, that sounds more appealing to me. Because if I didn't have to have the 9 to 5, I would probably use all of my time creating and just doing things that I feel passionate about. Obviously, I don't fully have that freedom. I still need to work. The mortgage needs to be paid. For me, it goes back into the idea of freedom of being you. You have to know what's important to yourself, because we are unique people. And for me, it's important that I have the time to draw or do some creative writing. And for you, it's just simply having more choices. And I think that's beautiful.
When we say freedom of being ourselves, I think that's so powerful. The amount of time we hear, stop being so loud, stop being you for like 5 minutes. Why are you craving all these things? Stop doing that. It's what society wants us to be, wants us to become. And if being you means to be loud and funny, I mean, you surround yourself with people that appreciate that about you. And maybe you surround yourself with people that are just as loud. Another one I would like to discuss is freedom of location.
It makes me think of the fact that even though we have our mortgage and we have our own setup and we are kind of tied to our 9 to 5s, we still have the freedom to select where we want to live.
If you want to buy a house, you can decide where you want to buy a house.
If I wanted to go and live in Cornwall, I could do that. Technically not today, but I could.
When I think of freedom of location, I automatically think about the power of my passport and how far it can take me. Because unfortunately, we cannot choose where we are born. According to Henley Passport Index, Japan will be the place to be because the citizens holding this passport are able to travel to 193 nations visa free, or perhaps they'll have to do with a visa on arrival. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have the passport issued by Afghanistan, which allows the holder entry to only 27 countries without applying for a visa in advance.
I guess we don't think about this enough as holders of European passports, of how much privilege we have.
Because for us, with an European passport, it's a lot easier to, pack my bag, pack my cat, and just move to Spain compared to what if I come from a country where my passport doesn't take me far? But what if I were born in North Korea? How far can I move except from one city to another city? If you hear my cat, that means I have one.
One of the trends that have emerged after 2019 was the digital nomads. And these are a group of people who just decide that they're going to live wherever they want to live. And I think that's very appealing to me personally.
Oh, I agree. Yeah.
But to some people, that would be no, why would I want to do that? I want to put roots somewhere. I want to feel like I belong to just one community. I want to immerse myself in that community. If you ask some people, the idea of moving country every now and then, it's so out of this world. But this kind of opened our views to how we can exercit that freedom. But what is also really interesting for me is that because I'm watching a lot of YouTube, and if you watch Yes Theory, you would see that Amar, for example, going back to this freedom of moving, he wasn't able to because he had to buy himself a new passport.
I think Omar's advantage was that he put himself in a position where he had the freedom to buy another passport. But he had a very strong point. If you come from Egypt, how far can you go with your passport? At least gives us an idea that it's possible. Where there is a will, there is a way.
Yeah.
What about the gender and pressure constructs?
Oh, we have many of those, and we're going to discuss some of them in some other episodes. No. I think it's beautiful that we now live in a world that is a bit more accepting of gender fluidity.
There are definitely limitations there. Again, comes from where you were born. I'm very lucky and very blessed to be in the right body. I identify myself fully as a woman. And sometimes I'm thinking, can I be a man? And I don't think I could. I just really enjoy putting eyeliner, doing my hair a certain way. Not that men cannot do that, of course, but for me, it comes naturally. And I really enjoy the aspects or everything that comes with being a woman. But if someone feels like they are not themselves, they should have the right to change that. And I think with the new generation, these types of freedom are evolving even more and more.
No, I agree 100%. And I feel that it's a really sad thought to think that someone doesn't belong to the body that they were born in. And the fact that you can change that is a very, very strong statement. It's a whole different conversation about what society does to support that for people who do make that very difficult decision and how much more we need to do. But I think it's a really beautiful type of freedom.
When we are talking about gender, is also choosing who you decide to spend the rest of your life with. The freedom to choose if you want to love the same gender, as long as it doesn't impact negatively the people around you or the society. I really don't see why that will be a negative. If anything, more people that get to choose what gender they want to be, who they decide to marry, if that will make them better people in the society, less frustrated, if anything, it's going to impact us all in a positive way.
Yeah.
Imagine living in a society where everyone is frustrated with the fact that they cannot be themselves, they cannot choose their religion, their gender, they have the freedom to choose where they want to live. I think happier people just leads to happier society.
I agree. Okay. How about, oh, this is a touchy one. How about the freedom of religion?
The ability to choose, practice it. When we talk about religion, what if someone decides God is not really who I connect with? Maybe Allah, maybe the universe. I also think it kind of comes from where we grew up, the families, the people we had around us at an early stage. I remember my grandma, she was very religious. So for her, was essential to go to church. Now, if it was going to church to hear about God or to socialize with her friends, I don't think I was at the right age to understand that. But in my family, we weren't forced to go to church. It was more about being a good person. And I think that's what's important with religion. I accept every religion out there, and I think everyone should, as long as we have the common goal, be better human beings, accept each other, love each other, respect each other, and so on.
Yeah. I also was born in a family with strong religious beliefs, but I didn't experience the same freedom of not going to church. Actually, I went to church for a really long time every Sunday, despite my fears. I didn't get that, but I also didn't start questioning it until I was like a rebellious teenager because it was just the normal thing to do. And where I grew up, everybody did that. So it's easy to see how you wouldn't question that because it feels so normalized. My relationship with religion and spirituality has changed a lot over the years, but that is also partly because I chose to come to England.
Religion and gender and equality and freedom to choose where you want to live. I think these are freedoms we take for granted, or at least I know I do.
I do too. And I think that's because I'm surrounded by them. I don't see them. I take them for granted because I have the ability to choose what kind of a job I do. And I have the ability to move to Cornwall. I don't know why I'm moving to Cornwall in this episode, but here I am.
And here I am craving Spain. In one of our dialogues, we also discussed about where you're coming from and the impact it has on your freedom. Because freedom for someone that lives in a country where even walking by yourself on the streets as a woman or walking on the street after 8 p.m. because, I don't know, you live in a region where it's not really safe. I've been taking this for granted. I can go bingo every night. I can be on the underground at 10 p.m. And personally, I don't feel in danger. I feel like it's a very safe surrounding for me. Why do you think freedom is important?
Because it keeps our world running. And like we said, often without us being aware of it. It creates and embraces diversity because people are unique.
Yeah. From my point of view, freedom is important because one size doesn't fit all. For you, freedom means something. For my family, it might mean something completely different. The fact that we are so unique, if anything, helps our economy, helps our society grow. If everyone thought the same, people wouldn't have gone on the moon. Electric cars wouldn't have been invented because everyone is the same. We don't think outside the box. We just follow a pattern. Freedom is important to make progress because we have the ability to be creative. To answer the question of why is freedom important, we looked into some data, and it's very easy to see a correlation between freedom and prosperity. So we have a couple of indexes. We have the Economic Freedom Index, which comes from Fraser Institute. And essentially what this index does is measures the degree of economic freedom present in 5 major areas. So they are looking at the size of the government, legal system and property rights, sound money, the ability to trade internationally, and some regulations. They count this as 10 for economic freedom and 0 for not free. Now, if we look at the countries with the lowest rank or the lowest index, we have Argentina, Venezuela, Iran, Syria, Algeria, Sudan, and a few others. If we also look at their GDP, there seems to be a very strong correlation there. These are emerging markets. And if we look at advanced economies, we'll also see a very high level of economic freedom. Another one is personal freedom and choice. This comes from the social progress imperative. And they're trying to answer the question of are people free of restrictions on personal decisions? So 100 is the highest. And then obviously there are countries that have below 100 on the level of freedom of choice. If we are looking at the countries that have under 50, we have Chad, we have Iraq, Bangladesh, Nigeria, Somalia, and many more. If we look at these countries, if we compare it just with GDP by itself, gross domestic product, we'll see these are countries where some people live below poverty levels. From an economics perspective, seems like, yes, indeed, you need freedom to be able to start up your own company, not have all this corruption surrounding your government. These are obviously impacts the economic situation of certain countries. These are just a couple of examples of data that prove the relationship between financial well-being and
Yes.
the freedom to choose what you want to do with your life.
So basically, Anna is our data expert. I cannot do such things.
Big words, big words.
But in other words, what we're seeing in this data is the fact that in countries where the rating of freedom is higher, the economy is doing better.
And I feel like it's exactly what we discussed earlier. We have people go on the moon. Why? Because they have the freedom to, first of all, have an idea and then go further with it, because they don't have all these constraints. Another one I looked into is the impact of lack of freedom on the general health. So leaving aside the economic side, there is this study done by World Health Organization, and their framework associates increased rights and freedom with increased wealth and social equality, which in turn promotes better health. There was another institute in Canada that did a follow-up study from WHO, and while they support the overall conclusion that indeed rights and freedom provide a core that successively impacts health, what they say with their model is that there are different origins for mental and physical health outcomes. There has to be further research into this, but overall, if we are just looking at a couple of studies, seems like they agree. Having increased rights also increases our health, our wealth, our social equality in a society.
So it's almost like the data is saying what we were saying in our first point, that when you have more freedom as an individual, it impacts you in different ways. It impacts your mental health, your overall health. And if you have the freedom to do these things, you can contribute to the society in a better way.
I think it's pretty much like having a job you love. I mean, your level of productivity and engagement compared to you waking up every morning and thinking, why do I have to be here? Because I need to pay rent, because I want to give my cat a better life. Obviously, your level of engagement and also the way you perform at work will be deeply impacted. This data just supports what we already as humans can see on our day-to-day life, the things that we are forced to do and the things that we do because we love to do them.
Is freedom something we have now, or is it a future concept?
I think is some sort of correlation between freedom and our state of mind, and might be a one in between. It has a lot to do with the way we see the world or our state of mind. If I feel in a very negative mindset, I'll just look at the things I don't have and I'll be like, I'm not free because I still have this mortgage. If I wake up one morning and I'm feeling positive, it's a sunny day, I'll just look, oh, I'll just think of all the positive things in my life. It will be obviously a present concept, something that I have now. What about you? Do you think you're in between, or you're skewed towards one more than the other?
I think I take certain freedoms for granted. It's funny you say that, because I do think that freedom is a state of mind, but because we're hardwired to think about negative things, it's very easy to say, oh, I don't have enough time or money, or I don't know, resources.
Yeah, focusing on the negatives, because it's a lot easier. Sometimes I'm under the impression that it takes so much more energy to be positive. The morning speech, like, I got this, I can do this, stay positive. When I can just watch TV, someone is fighting or arguing, a little gossip is so much easier. I feel like it doesn't require as much energy to look at the negative side.
I am somewhere in between. When I was researching for this podcast, I was just kind of looking at what philosophers have said about freedom. And I came across this TED talk by Raul Martinez, which we're going to put in full on sondercharacters.com. We're not going to discuss it all here. He was talking about freedom and how we are ultimately responsible for what we choose to believe in. The fact that we don't choose where we are born, or we don't choose the society that we are born in, or even the time, and we don't have any control over it. But when we acknowledge that, we also have to acknowledge that we have the responsibility to do something with that information. So even when we think we don't have a choice, we do. We are free to have many choices. And the best example of that I can think of, it's Romania and communism. For both of us, we know that our parents grew up in that. We were born a bit later after the communism fell. And communism was a regime of oppression where I know stories from my parents and my grandparents that they weren't able to speak. They weren't able to say what they actually thought about the regime or certain policies. They couldn't speak without consequences, so they didn't have that freedom of speech. Or if they chose to pursue it, they would get into really big trouble. It doesn't mean that they didn't think it. Obviously, as a result of that, there came the revolution in 1989.
Same. I had a very similar conversation with my uncle. And obviously, we are part of two different generations. And it was very interesting to get his take on the communist era. And he said to me, back in the day, we weren't allowed to speak. We could not complain about the political party or the way the country was run because that freedom wasn't available. There were consequences. However, nowadays, in my generation, I can give my opinion about a lot of things, but also if I have a very strong opinion about something, I go on Twitter, easy peasy. I can just leave a comment. I can just discuss it online. However, if I'm thinking of the political party, they also have the freedom to choose if they wish to react to my statement or not. So the question is it better to not have the freedom and no one listens to you, or have the freedom of speech but the other person has the freedom of choosing to reply or not?
It's interesting that you asked that because I always thought about it in this way. So when I think about regimes and political ideologies, I think that the leaders always have a choice. They always have the freedom to not listen to the population. It's just that in democratic society, you don't go to jail for going on Twitter and saying something about someone who you don't particularly agree with. And we see this in social media all the time. We see it throughout the elections. We see people going on social media and Twitter and saying things like, I don't like what you're saying, or making a mockery, or making
Yeah.
like video mashups, or making a YouTube video about that. And it, in the UK, like nothing happens. You're just on YouTube, you get views, people might agree with you. You get a lot of hater in the comments, which is another way in which you exercit freedom.
I guess it's a consequence of having the freedom to speak.
Yeah.
Someone has the freedom to not agree. Someone has the freedom to also have opinions on your statements.
It's really bittersweet when you think about what your uncle said, because he probably felt that living then and living now he can go on Facebook and he can say whatever he wants. Whereas at that time, first of all, there was no Facebook. Second of all, even if he managed to speak out loud, he probably knew that he would get into trouble for it. But now he goes and it just feels like no one is listening anyway.
Do you think the idea of freedom can change your meaning over time?
We've seen this all the time. The idea of freedom when you're 14 is not the same idea when you're 30. When you're 14, you think, oh my God, I can't wait to be a grown up. I can do whatever I want.
Oh, yeah, that one with I'm going to stay up really late. And then you become an adult and you don't want to stay up late because you need to wake up tomorrow morning. You'll feel tired. It's like, oh, I want to be able to move by myself or move out of my parents' house so I can do whatever I want whenever I want. And then you live by yourself and you're like, that's not even that cool. Not even as cool as I expected it to be.
Of course. And it's not cool because it comes with a lot of responsibility. But when you're a teenager, you're always like, yeah, I can't wait to move out. I can't wait to be an adult and do all these things. because you want more freedom. And I love being an adult, by the way, because I get to choose how I spend my day. I would say 90% of the time.
Mate, you have the freedom to do that as well when you're a child, to a point where I can do whatever I want, whenever I want, as long as my mom approves. When I'm thinking of this idea of freedom and how it changed over time, I'm thinking of same-sex marriage, which was recognized and performed in England and Wales since March 2014, and in Scotland, I believe, was in December 2014. Maybe now that we have the freedom to decide on our own consensual adult relationship, and if we ultimately decide to marry our partner, regardless of their gender, we no longer need to fight to access these rights. So we move on onto another freedom.
I think we do that all the time because the lack of certain freedom gives us people something to fight for.
And I don't think that's always a negative thing. Would you agree? It's just a way of making progress, or at least the way I look at things. If it changes meaning over time, might not be all that negative, might be in a positive way.
So without this urge to fight some kind of lack of freedom, we probably wouldn't do such great things. We fight regimes and we fight some ideologies and some social constraints. You need that as a burning platform for change sometimes.
I would say same-sex marriage wouldn't have been recognized if that wasn't desired by so many people.
Yes.
It's not all that bad. Of course, we can look at the negatives, because someone will always want some sort of freedom that will have a negative impact. But if we focus on the positives, can actually bring improvements.
Yeah. And improvements in our personal life. So, for example, you trying to pay off your mortgage early, you'll have to replace that with something else at some point. For me, it's just being creative, and I don't feel tied to my 9 to 5 job. I don't feel like I'm a victim of the society per se. I have to do this. I need to sustain myself financially so I can create more, so I can do more. And this podcast is a result of that.
Why do you think we crave freedom?
I think we crave freedom because it gives us purpose and cause. Like I said earlier, not having something becomes a burning platform for change. So it gives you a purpose. I want to be financially free because I am not right now. I don't have that freedom. Do you not think that it does this to you?
So when I'm saying why I crave freedom, why I crave to be mortgage free, is because of the choices I'll have available afterwards. I do think the more people are feeling accepted, included, the better we perform as a society.
Yeah. Sometimes when we think about freedom, we might fail to think about how it makes us more compassionate.
Exactly. And more caring, and hurt people, right? But
Yes.
good people will do good in this world.
The last point I want to make about this is that sometimes it's not a person who tells us that we don't have that freedom. Sometimes it's the society as a whole, and it's like unwritten rules. And I've experienced in Romania where culturally, for a lot of people, because I'm the age that I am, which is, come on, guys, I'm in my 30s, it's fine. But because everyone else, or a large majority of the people in that society, they get married a lot earlier or they start having children a lot earlier. I felt a lot of pressure to do all these things, even though I don't live there. They kind of live in my own head. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So it doesn't feel like I have the freedom to decide when, by living my own regular life, I go against the grain. I go against what everyone else is doing. And that was something that I had to work on really, really hard to accept.
You look at it from the outside, seems like the other people, but do we let the other people have control over us? Because we do have the freedom to decide when to say no.
Of
The way
course,
we decide, for instance, if the people I used to socialize with or the people I used to be surrounded by when I was home, if they used to do something against my morals, it's very easy for me to say, no, I'm not going to be like you. This is not who I am as a person. I'm not going to follow your example. Yet it seems like there are certain things we impose onto ourselves because they don't say you have to do this. We just convince ourselves that we have to do or act a certain way.
the society that we are in builds on our kind of own perception about life, and it's really random. If I was born in the UK, I probably would have never even fought with the idea that I have to have children by a certain age. Yet I came here, I lived half of my life there. I still felt some kind of weird pressure, and no one was actively telling me. They didn't have pancards across my window saying, "Where is your baby? You're turning 30 next week." But it does feel like there is this kind of unwritten rule about, hey, well, it's not that we don't like you anymore, but we don't know where to put you because you're not doing what everyone else is doing. And that's fine. But it required a lot of personal work for me to accept that actually I am not this person. I don't want all these things. And I have to be okay with that.
The reason we actually wanted to discuss freedom is because here we are, 40 minutes later, and we barely scraped the surface. There's so much more to cover. For example, freedom of choosing one state in life, or freedom of choosing at what age we want to have kids, or get married, or settle down, and so many more. Now that we come to an end, sure, we look at what other people say. I found this very interesting looking at other social media platforms, and was the question of what does freedom mean to you, or what's freedom? And some very interesting replies.
Yes. Can you share some of them with us?
Say no more. Someone said that freedom is a state of mind, is something we find within us, and something that can never be taken away by anyone other than ourselves. And it explains so nicely exactly the last couple of phrases we were discussing about. Freedom is being free from the need or desire to feel free. Being able to sleep in when you want, that's freedom.
I love that.
Someone said, I'm going to ask a better question. Who is freedom? I thought about it and I cannot answer it. Who is freedom?
No, I don't know. I don't know.
Someone said that freedom equals simplicity, or live the way you want without restrictions.
That's a really big concept in philosophy as well. So it's not just some people on the internet saying that. This has been debated. Freedom is the absence of something else. Interesting.
Food for thought. I want you to read the last one because I think you're going to read it best.
Thank you. Libertas, I hope I'm reading that correctly. They mean free man as opposed to being a slave. Eleteros has a similar meaning to the Latin word, but it also means independence, not from the state, but from other states. Greek states are supposed to be independent from other city-states or overlords.
Interesting point. Yeah, it's such a relative word. Someone actually said that even the ability to distinguish between good and evil is developed in us by mass propaganda. That might be cartoons, movies, and the media. And I think the concept of freedom is also so developed in us. Watching TV.
Well, maybe with this podcast, we'll invite more people to think about their own freedom and think about what they might feel frustrated by at this point in time. And most importantly, how they're going to go after it so they feel less frustrated by it.
Okay, if you had to describe in one phrase your own perception of freedom, just use a few words, what would you say?
Live and let live.
And I think I'm going to repeat myself and I'll say, freedom is a state of mind. Even when everything fails around us, we still have the freedom to dream, to hope, and to be better people.